That's the
So
sound that my bits make, by the way. It's
so with
gross.
moving to full time, uh were you just relying on Twitch at that point, or like, because you have a Patreon now, but you haven't
Yes,
always had one, right?
at the time that I became full time, I was not partnered yet. I actually, like, surprise, surprise, got partnered like 3 weeks later. Renee remembers because it was on her stream. But I had a GameWisp account, which is another. It doesn't exist anymore. They've closed that portion of their business, but it's another subscription type service at the time. Because like things improved so fast. Patreon did not have the ability to have on-stream alerts, and GameWisp was a lot more integrated with Twitch as a system. And it had, like, you could send through recurring alerts every month.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very similar to what a Twitch subscription would be, like, experientially. Whereas Patreon, even if you could, I think there was one service at the time that was doing Patreon alerts, but it would only send through the first time. So I decided to go with GameWisp.
It's like not month to month, just the first time somebody's okay.
Subscribed. Yeah. So the first time they put in the subscription, it would send an alert, but you could never like re-put through a subscription alert for Patreon at that time. I don't think you can anymore either. It's just the one time. But yeah, so I was trying to find something that duplicated Twitch's subscription experience as much as possible, because things that are familiar to people, they are more likely to use.
Right.
So I had a Patreon before this, and then I switched to GameWisp. And then maybe like 9 months to a year into using the GameWisp, because I was partnered then, I actually shut it down and canceled all the subscriptions on the GameWisp because I wasn't using it as much. But that was my like alternate revenue stream when I was first starting out broadcasting. It was mostly tips and then the GameWisp. Whereas now, I kind of have like 3 sources. I rarely, if ever, get tips anymore. Most of my income comes from Twitch subscriptions, Patreon subscriptions, and paid role-playing games.
So that's a weird sort of phenomenon by itself, one that I think doesn't get discussed often enough in general. Mm-hmm. It's sort of the kind, it's kind of, it's a thing, it's sort of the kind of the thing that we'll talk about like privately every once in a while, right? Like just among friends, it's like, oh, this thing is kind of drying up and I don't really know what I'm going to do. Oh, have you thought about, spreading out into, something else, trying to, a lot of it feels like ideally when it comes to revenue, and this is true for you as a person, no matter what you're doing, if you as a sort of a more robust 21st century lifestyle involves having a bunch of different things that you're doing.
From what I've read,
job.
Yeah, as a self-employed person, and it probably counts for like people who are working low-paying jobs as well. As a self-employed person, you should have 3 different streams of revenue. So if one of them dries up,
if one gets cut,
then you'll be okay.
Right.
That was at least like what I was recommended. I think it was on a stupid YouTube video or something, but it makes sense because like what you're saying, like if perchance like all the role-playing shows I was on stopped paying me, then I would still have 2 other sources of income while I like figured that shit out, because change is hard.
Well, because those are the uncontrollables, right? Like you control a lot of things and how you respond to certain things and what choices you're going to make in certain situations, but the situations themselves that arise are the uncontrollable ones. Whether or not you're going to get more tips this month versus last month, like you cannot determine that at all.
Well, and that was so hard for me. When my tips dried up completely, it was almost immediately. It was 1 month I was getting tips, and then the next I was getting like $100.
Yeah, I actually had the exact same thing happen to me, but I didn't even really anticipate it happening. But I was talking to my management at the time, and I said, I get this certain amount of money in tips each month, but I would really like it if I got the same amount of money in sponsors instead, because I didn't want to rely on those tips. And the second I got those sponsors figured out, literally probably a month later, no tips. I make maybe like $100 a month in tips, which is still like $100 I don't have, but that's not it's not nearly as much like what I was making previously that I could actually like live off of as like a real revenue stream. So it's really it's crazy how that could just immediately just go away. And I didn't even
Yeah.
anticipate it. I'm just super happy that I guess I planned for it. I don't know if maybe it was a
Well, so how does that
gut feeling,
planning?
I guess.
Yeah, how much work do you think somebody should do in advance to prepare for the uncontrollables?
I just think you should never rely on tips as money that like you should if you get tip money, you should just keep it in your PayPal and never touch it ever.
Well, I think part of this too is just like never rely on anything. Like one day you have like 500 Twitch subscriptions and the next day you have 100. Like it's never like, this is just like throwing numbers out there, but nothing is ever permanent. And especially this industry is changing
for sure.
so quickly.
Yeah.
Like it's not just tips, right? You have to make sure that like if something dries up, you have another thing.
You're also at the mercy of like your platform, you know, like with Tumblr, like changing the way that they run. YouTube is always making changes that, you know, screw a lot of people over. So it like in content creation, being able to handle change and being able to be flexible and being prepared are super important